We live in a world that celebrates achievement but quietly ignores exhaustion. We praise titles, numbers, and growth curves, yet we rarely stop to ask a far more uncomfortable question: why are we doing any of this in the first place? Why are so many people who look successful on the outside feeling empty on the inside? Why do organizations that are more powerful than ever struggle to inspire trust, loyalty, or belief? Somewhere along the way, we confuse progress with meaning, authority with leadership, and success with fulfillment. Leadership as we practice it today is often reduced to position, a role, a badge of power. But authority does not make someone a leader. Authority can compel compliance. Leadership earns commitment. And the difference between the two is responsibility. True leadership is not about being in charge. It is about taking responsibility for those in your charge. When leaders forget this, systems break, cultures decay, and people burn out, not because they are weak, but because the system was never designed to support them as human beings. Burnout is not a personal failure. Disconnection is not a lack of resilience. These are symptoms of environments built without a clear why. When organizations obsess over short-term results at the expense of people, they create cultures of fear, and fear is incredibly effective at first. Fear can drive performance, speed, and compliance. But it also erodes trust, silences creativity, and fractures relationships. Over time, fear-based leadership produces exactly what it tries to prevent: disengagement, apathy, and collapse. We see everywhere leaders chasing quarterly numbers while ignoring the long-term cost to morale. Institutions growing larger but losing legitimacy. Societies advancing technologically while people feel increasingly alone. Inequality widens not because people lack talent, but because systems reward extraction over contribution. When success is defined purely by outcomes instead of impact, humans become resources to be consumed rather than lives to be protected. Great leaders understand something profoundly simple. People are not inspired by what you do. They are inspired by why you do it. The why is not a slogan on a wall or a sentence in a mission statement. It is a discipline. It is a decision-making filter. It is the reason people trust you even when the path is uncertain. When leaders are clear on their why, they prioritize people even when it is inconvenient. They think long-term even when pressure demands shortcuts. They choose responsibility over authority. Responsibility means creating environments where people feel safe to speak up, to fail, to grow. It means measuring success not only by profit or performance, but by the strength of relationships and the health of the culture. It means understanding that leadership is service not to ego, not to shareholders alone, but to a cause greater than oneself. This kind of leadership does not weaken results, it sustains them. Hope does not come from better tactics alone. Hope comes from alignment. When individuals rediscover their why, work becomes more than a transaction, it becomes a contribution. When leaders lead with empathy and courage, trust is rebuilt. When communities choose cooperation over competition, systems begin to heal. None of this is easy. Responsibility rarely is, but it is the only path that lasts. The future does not belong to the loudest voices or the most powerful titles. It belongs to those willing to take responsibility for their people, their decisions, and their impact on the next generation. Leadership is not about being above others. It is about standing with them, protecting them, and guiding them toward something meaningful. So the question is not whether you have authority. The question is whether you are willing to take responsibility. Responsibility to think beyond yourself. Responsibility to act with integrity when no one is watching. Responsibility to build something that serves people long after you are gone. If enough of us choose that path together, we do not just change organizations. We change culture. We change society. And we become the kind of leaders the world is desperately waiting for. Leadership is responsibility for people, not authority over them, because authority can be granted in a moment, but responsibility must be carried every day. Authority comes with a title, a promotion, or a position on an organizational chart. Responsibility comes with choice. It is the decision to care about the lives, growth, and well-being of others even when doing so is inconvenient, risky, or invisible. Too often, modern leadership confuses control with care, power with purpose, and status with service, and the result is a world full of managers who can enforce rules, but few leaders who can inspire belief. When leadership is built on authority alone, people become means to an end. They are measured, optimized, and pressured to perform, but rarely protected. Targets are met, deadlines are enforced, and metrics are celebrated, yet something essential erodes beneath the surface. Trust fades first. When people feel that their value exists only in what they produce, they stop bringing their full selves to work. They stop taking risks. They stop speaking honestly. They comply, but they do not commit. Authority can demand obedience, but it cannot earn loyalty. Responsibility-based leadership begins with a fundamentally different question, not how do I get the most out of my people, but how do I create an environment where my people can do their best work? This shift changes everything. It reframes leadership from a position of dominance to a position of stewardship. The leader is no longer the one who sits at the top issuing directives, but the one who stands at the edge, absorbing pressure, removing obstacles, and protecting the team from unnecessary harm. This kind of leadership understands that results are an outcome, not the objective. Burnout is one of the clearest signals of leadership that relies on authority instead of responsibility. People do not burn out because they care too much. They burn out because they care deeply in systems that do not care back. When leaders push for performance without providing safety, clarity, or meaning, they create a constant state of threat. And in a state of threat, the human body prioritizes survival over creativity, cooperation, and long-term thinking. The irony is that the very pressure designed to increase output eventually destroys the capacity to sustain it. Taking responsibility for people means recognizing that leadership is human work before it is strategic work. It means understanding that trust is not built through slogans or policies, but through consistent behavior over time. Leaders who take responsibility listen more than they speak. They ask better questions. They admit uncertainty and own mistakes. They understand that psychological safety is not softness, but strength, because teams that feel safe outperform teams that feel managed. People will give far more to themselves to a leader who genuinely cares than to one who merely evaluates. Authority-focused leadership often relies on fear because fear works quickly. It produces immediate compliance and short-term gains. But fear is expensive. It taxes morale, drains energy, and fractures relationships. Responsibility-driven leadership, by contrast, requires patience. It invests in people before the return is visible. It prioritizes development over domination. Leaders who accept responsibility understand that their role is not to be the smartest person in the room, but to create a room where everyone can be smart. This responsibility extends beyond individual interactions to the system's leaders' design. Policies, incentives, and structures communicate values more clearly than words ever will. If a system rewards speed over integrity, people will cut corners. If it rewards results over well-being, people will sacrifice themselves to survive. Leaders who take responsibility examine not only behavior, but the conditions that shape behavior. They recognize that most problems are not caused by bad people, but by broken systems that incentivize the wrong things. True leadership also accepts the moral weight of influence. Every decision a leader makes ripples outward, affecting families, communities, and future generations. Responsibility means thinking long-term, even when the pressure is short-term. It means making choices today that may cost more now, but prevent far greater costs later. It means understanding that leadership is not about being remembered as powerful, but about leaving people stronger than you found them. When leadership is rooted in responsibility, people feel seen, valued, and protected. They show up not because they have to, but because they want to. They commit not out of fear, but out of belief, and belief is what sustains effort when conditions are uncertain and outcomes are unclear. Authority can command behavior, but responsibility inspires trust. And trust unlocks performance that no amount of control can ever achieve. Because at its core, leadership was never meant to elevate one person above others, but to accept the burden of caring for others in a way that gives them the confidence to care for one another, to take risks, to grow, and to believe that their work matters beyond the numbers, beyond the title, beyond the moment, within a system that understands people are not tools to be used, but lives to be protected and developed through choices that leaders make every single day. Burnout and disconnection are symptoms of purposeless systems, not personal failure, because human beings are not designed to operate indefinitely without meaning. When people feel exhausted, numb, or detached from their work, the dominant narrative tells them to try harder, become more resilient, manage their time better, or fix themselves. But this framing is deeply flawed. It treats the individual as the problem while ignoring the environment that produced the problem in the first place. Most people do not lose motivation because they lack discipline or talent. They lose it because the systems they operate in have stripped their effort of meaning. Purpose is not a luxury. It is a biological and psychological need. When people understand why their work matters, they can endure stress, uncertainty, and even sacrifice. When that sense of meaning disappears, the same workload becomes unbearable. Burnout emerges not from working too much, but from working without clarity, autonomy, or connection to a larger cause. Disconnection follows when people no longer see how their contribution fits into something that matters. Over time, they begin to feel invisible, replaceable, and emotionally detached as a form of self-protection. Modern systems often prioritize efficiency over humanity. Processes are optimized, metrics are tracked, and performance is measured in increasingly narrow ways. Yet in this pursuit of productivity, many organizations forget to ask the most important question: what is this all for? When leaders cannot articulate a clear why, decisions default to short-term gains. Targets replace trust. Pressure replaces purpose. People become resources to be managed rather than humans to be supported. In such environments, burnout is not an anomaly, it is an inevitability. Disconnection is one of the earliest warning signs of a system without purpose. People stop caring not because they are lazy, but because caring has become unsafe or pointless. When effort is met with indifference, when values are spoken but not practiced, when integrity is punished and compliance is rewarded, people emotionally withdraw. This withdrawal is often misinterpreted as a lack of engagement, when in reality it is a rational response to a system that no longer feels aligned with who they are or what they believe. Fear-based. Leadership accelerates this breakdown. When leaders rely on fear to drive results, they may achieve compliance, but they destroy belonging. Fear narrows focus, discourages honesty, and forces people into survival mode. In survival mode, collaboration diminishes, creativity declines, and long-term thinking disappears. Burnout thrives in these conditions because people are constantly expending emotional energy to protect themselves rather than to contribute meaningfully. No amount of wellness programs or motivational slogans can compensate for a culture that fundamentally lacks purpose. Purposeless systems also erode trust, and without trust, human connection weakens. Trust is built when people believe that leaders care about them beyond their output. When decisions consistently prioritize numbers over people, trust dissolves. As trust fades, people stop investing emotionally. They do what is required and nothing more. This is not because they lack ambition, but because the system has taught them that their extra effort will not be valued or protected. Disconnection becomes a coping mechanism. The most damaging aspect of this dynamic is the shame it places on individuals. People internalize burnout as personal inadequacy. They assume they are not strong enough, passionate enough, or grateful enough. This self-blame obscures the real issue and prevents meaningful change. Systems remain intact while individuals cycle in and out, carrying the same exhaustion, the same frustration, and the same quiet sense of failure. The system never heals because it is never questioned. Purpose-driven systems operate differently. They begin with a clear understanding of why the work exists and whom it serves. In these environments, leaders design structures that support human needs for belonging, growth, and contribution. Expectations are clear, values are lived, and people understand how their work makes a difference. Stress still exists, but it is meaningful stress. Effort feels worthwhile because it is connected to something larger than personal survival. When leaders take responsibility for creating purpose, burnout decreases and connection strengthens. People feel seen. They feel safe to speak honestly. They feel proud of what they contribute. Energy returns not because the workload disappeared, but because the work regained meaning. Disconnection dissolves when people are reminded that they matter, that their effort serves a real purpose, and that they are part of a system that values them as humans, not just as performers, because when systems are built with purpose at the center, people do not need to be constantly motivated or fixed. They need to be trusted, supported, and aligned with a cause that gives their effort significance and allows them to bring their whole selves to the work they do every day. Fear drives short-term performance but destroys trust, creativity, and long-term strength because fear is a powerful but unsustainable motivator. When people are afraid of losing their job, missing a target, or disappointing a superior, they will often push harder, move faster, and comply without resistance. From the outside, this can look like effective leadership. Results appear quickly, deadlines are met, productivity spikes. But what is happening beneath the surface tells a very different story, one that only becomes visible over time when the damage has already been done. Fear narrows human behavior. It activates survival instincts, not higher thinking. In fearful environments, people focus on avoiding punishment rather than pursuing excellence. They do what is required to stay safe, not what is possible to move forward. This is why fear-based systems often produce repetition instead of innovation. Creativity requires psychological safety, the freedom to explore ideas without the threat of embarrassment or reprisal. When fear is present, people stop asking questions, stop challenging assumptions, and stop offering new perspectives because the risk feels too high. Trust is the first casualty of fear-driven leadership. Trust is built when people believe that leaders have their best interests at heart. Fear sends the opposite message. It tells people that they are valued only for their output, and that mistakes will be punished rather than learned from. Over time, this erodes confidence in leadership intentions. People may still follow orders, but they no longer believe. And without belief, trust collapses into compliance. Compliance looks productive in the short term, but it is hollow. It lacks commitment, loyalty, and discretionary effort. As trust diminishes, communication deteriorates. People begin to filter information, telling leaders what they think they want to hear, rather than what they need to know. Problems are hidden until they become crises. Warnings are ignored because raising concerns feels dangerous. Fear creates silence, and silence allows small issues to grow unchecked. Organizations then respond with more control, more rules, and more pressure, reinforcing the very fear that caused the breakdown in the first place. Creativity does not survive in these conditions. Innovation requires experimentation, and experimentation requires the possibility of failure. In fear-based cultures, failure is not seen as a teacher, but as a liability. As a result, people stick to what is familiar and proven, even when it no longer works. They follow process instead of purpose. Over time, organizations lose their ability to adapt. They become efficient at doing yesterday's work while falling behind in tomorrow's world. Long-term strength depends on relationships, not just results. Fear weakens relationships because it creates distance between people. Leaders become enforcers rather than partners. Teams become competitors rather than collaborators. Individuals protect themselves instead of supporting one another. This fragmentation reduces resilience. When challenges arise, people are less willing to step up, take responsibility, or help beyond their role because the system has taught them that self-preservation comes first. Fear also accelerates burnout. Living in a constant state of threat is exhausting. The human nervous system is not designed to sustain prolonged stress without meaning or safety. Over time, energy drains, engagement drops, and health suffers. The organization may still function, but it does so by consuming its people. Talent leaves. Those who stay disengage. The apparent strength built through fear reveals itself as fragility when conditions change or pressure increases. Leaders who rely on fear often believe they're being realistic or tough. They justify their approach by pointing to results. But leadership is not about what you can force today. It is about what you can sustain tomorrow. Short-term performance achieved through fear is borrowed energy. It is extracted at the expense of trust, creativity, and human connection. Eventually, the debt must be paid. True leadership understands that performance is a byproduct of environment. When people feel safe, trusted, and valued, they perform not because they are afraid to fail, but because they want to succeed. They take initiative. They share ideas. They support one another. This is not idealism. It is biology and behavior. Humans thrive in environments of trust. Organizations and societies that choose fear as a tool may appear strong, but their foundations are weak. Strength built on fear cannot endure change, uncertainty, or adversity. Real strength comes from trust, from shared purpose, and from leaders who choose courage over control. Fear may deliver speed, but it sacrifices depth. It may drive output, but it undermines resilience. And in a world that demands adaptability, creativity, and cooperation, any system that depends on fear will eventually collapse under the weight of its own insecurity, because what fear builds quickly, it destroys slowly, quietly, and from the inside out. Clarity of why creates trust, alignment, and sustainable success, because human beings are wired to seek meaning before action. When people understand why something exists, they are able to make sense of what they are being asked to do and how they are expected to contribute. Without that clarity, work becomes a series of disconnected tasks, driven by obligation rather than belief. The why is not a motivational phrase or a marketing statement. It is the foundational purpose that explains intent, direction, and values, and when it is clear, it becomes a source of stability in an uncertain world. Trust begins with clarity. People trust leaders who are consistent, and consistency comes from a clear why. When leaders know why they make decisions, their behavior becomes predictable in the best sense of the word. Even when people disagree with a decision, they can understand it. This understanding builds confidence that leadership is acting with intention rather than impulse. In contrast, when the why is unclear or constantly shifting, decisions feel arbitrary. People are left guessing what truly matters, and uncertainty breeds Skepticism. Trust erodes not because leaders make mistakes, but because no one knows what the leaders stand for. Alignment is the natural outcome of a shared why. When people understand the purpose of their organization or community, they do not need to be tightly controlled. They can make decisions independently while still moving in the same direction. The why acts as a compass, guiding behavior without constant oversight. This reduces friction, speeds up decision-making, and empowers people at every level to take responsibility. Instead of asking for permission, people ask whether their actions align with the purpose. And this shift transforms cultures from dependent to accountable. Without clarity of why, alignment collapses into compliance. People follow instructions but lack context. They execute tasks without understanding. Impact. Silos form as teams optimize for their own goals rather than the collective mission. Energy is wasted managing conflicts that arise from misaligned priorities. The absence of a shared purpose forces leaders to rely on rules, incentives, and pressure to keep things moving. This approach may produce activity, but it rarely produces progress. Sustainable success requires more than talent and strategy. It requires endurance, and endurance comes from belief. When people believe in why they do what they do, they are more resilient in the face of challenge. They are willing to persevere through uncertainty because their effort feels meaningful. This is why purpose-driven organizations often outperform others over time. They are not immune to setbacks, but they recover faster because their people remain committed even when results fluctuate. Clarity of why also attracts and retains the right people. When purpose is clear, individuals can choose alignment intentionally. Those who resonate with the why lean in, while those who do not self-select out. This reduces cultural friction and increases engagement. People feel a sense of belonging because they share a common cause, not just a workplace. Belonging strengthens loyalty, and loyalty stabilizes organizations through periods of change. In environments with a clear why, leaders lead differently. They communicate more effectively because their message is anchored in purpose. They make difficult decisions with greater confidence because the why provides guidance. Short-term temptations are easier to resist when leaders are committed to a long-term cause. This does not mean sacrificing results. It means framing results as a means rather than an end. Success becomes something that is built with people, not extracted from them. The absence of a clear why forces organizations to define success narrowly. Metrics replace meaning. Growth becomes the goal rather than the outcome. Over time, this hollow version of success feels fragile. When conditions change, when markets shift, or when pressure increases, there is nothing solid to hold on to. People lose confidence, trust weakens, and alignment fractures because there was never a shared foundation. Clarity of why provides that foundation. It creates coherence between intention and action. It allows people to trust leadership, align their efforts, and sustain performance over time. It transforms work from a transaction into a contribution and leadership from control into guidance. When the why is clear, people do not need to be constantly motivated or monitored. They are pulled forward by purpose rather than pushed by pressure. And in that environment, trust deepens, alignment strengthens, and success becomes something that lasts because it is rooted in meaning rather than momentum, in shared belief rather than fear, and in a commitment to something bigger than immediate results that gives people a reason to stay, to care, and to keep going even when the path is difficult. True leadership is service to something bigger than oneself and a commitment to the future, because leadership was never meant to be an exercise in self-importance. At its core, leadership is an act of stewardship. It is the willingness to place the needs of the mission, the people, and the generations that follow above personal comfort, recognition, or short-term gain. When leadership becomes centered on ego, status, or control, it may create visibility, but it does not create impact. Impact requires humility, patience, and the courage to act in service of a cause that will outlast the leader. Service-oriented leadership begins with the understanding that power is not the goal, but a responsibility. Leaders who serve something bigger than themselves do not ask how leadership can elevate their identity. They ask how their role can protect and strengthen others. This shift changes how decisions are made. Choices are evaluated not only by what they deliver today, but by what they preserve for tomorrow. The leader becomes accountable not just for outcomes, but for consequences, seen and unseen, immediate and long-term. A commitment to the future demands long-term thinking in a world obsessed with immediacy. Short-term wins are seductive because they are visible and rewarded. They produce applause, bonuses, and recognition. But leadership rooted in service understands that what is rewarded in the present is not always what is right for the future. Serving something bigger often requires resisting pressure, delaying gratification, and absorbing criticism for decisions whose benefits may not be immediately apparent. This is the quiet discipline of leadership that rarely makes headlines but shapes history. When leaders commit to the future, they invest in people. They prioritize development over extraction. They understand that talent is not consumed but cultivated. Training, mentorship, and trust are seen not as cost but as obligation. Leaders who serve the future measure success by how well their people can succeed without them. Their legacy is not dependency, but capability. They leave behind stronger systems, wiser teams, and cultures that can endure beyond their tenure. Service-based leadership also redefines success. Success is no longer measured solely by growth, profit, or dominance, but by sustainability and impact. It asks whether the organization, community, or society will be healthier because this leader was there. It asks whether trust increased, whether opportunity expanded, and whether the next generation was better prepared than the last. These questions require moral clarity, not just strategic skill. Fear has no place in leadership that serves the future. Fear encourages hoarding, control, and self-preservation. Service encourages sharing, empowerment, and resilience. Leaders who serve something bigger create environments of safety because they understand that innovation and progress require risk. They protect people when mistakes happen, not because failure is desirable, but because learning is essential. This protection builds loyalty, courage, and collective strength. Commitment to the future also means acknowledging interdependence. No leader builds anything alone. Serving something bigger requires collaboration across differences, listening beyond one's own perspective, and valuing contributions that may never be personally credited. This humility strengthens systems because it distributes ownership and responsibility. When leadership is shared, continuity is preserved even as individuals come and go. Perhaps the most demanding aspect of this kind of leadership is its patience. Results may take years to materialize. Recognition may never come. Yet leaders who serve the future are sustained by belief rather than applause. They are guided by purpose rather than popularity. Their decisions are anchored in values that do not shift with circumstance, providing stability in times of uncertainty. True leadership, then, is not about being remembered as the one in charge. It is about being remembered as the one who cared, the one who protected the integrity of the mission when it was easier to compromise, the one who chose people over ego and principles over convenience. Leadership that serves something bigger than oneself does not seek to control the future, but to prepare it. It builds with patience, acts with responsibility, and leaves behind systems that can continue to serve long after the leader is gone, because the highest expression of leadership is not how much power one accumulates, but how much responsibility one is willing to carry for the sake of others and for a future they may never personally benefit from.